Thank you, Martin. Hey, Martin, just a second. Thank you for coming all the way just for this talk. You flew in, flew out, right? And you're in New York now.
I'm very happy to be here.
You think Europe sucks so bad that you had to leave?
No. I'm actually having a great time both in Europe and the States.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Of course, you love Europe, Martin, and it's great that you come just for us for this talk.
Very happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. One day we'll have to do a full day with the Varsavskis on stage. It must have felt weird to have your daughter.
Well, some are really a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old, but we'll get them. We'll get them.
All Varsavskis entrepreneurs. That's good. Thank you, Martin. Next up, and the last session of this morning, we have also the finalists of the startup competition, which have been chosen. So I just met them, which is cool. I like it, and I have nothing to do with the choice, of course. So John Battelle is the chairman and CEO of Federated Media. He's also the founder of a conference, you know, called Web 2.0. He's an author. He's going to talk about his next book. And he is also a good friend, a very good friend, and someone I really was looking forward to have here at LeWeb. So here we go, John Battelle. Welcome, John.
Louis, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's.
You want me to sit here?
Please, I leave you the whole coach.
Well, I just think it was a bit awkward when you were both on this
couch. Yes, we were a little cozy,
like,
right?
It was like.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, so this is better.
Thank you. And you know a thing or two about conferences, right?
Oh.
So
yes.
Thanks. I'm hoping I will have tried every configuration by the end of the conference. Then I'll know where to sit.
You just keep sitting wherever you want. It's your conference.
Right. Thank you, John. So you're launching Open.co. That's also why you're OpenCo.
Yeah.
That's also why you're here, which starts tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow.
What is it?
Yeah. So how many of you guys know about OpenCo out there? It's hard to see. Thank you. So this is an idea that sort of sprang out of a collaboration with a friend of mine in California. And what we had noticed is there's sort of phases. I consider myself something of an anthropologist or a historian of this narrative that we're all enjoined and we're all part of, the narrative of the internet. And there was this phase that we called Web 2, and it very much felt to me that we were entering a new phase. And it didn't really have a name, and maybe it doesn't need one. But as a writer, I like to give things names, and it makes it easier to pick things up when they have handles. And OpenCo, to me, is about this next phase of how of the types of companies that are starting to get built around the world. They have this sort of shared set of values that feels really internet-y, you know, like the sort of values of the open internet. But they aren't necessarily internet companies per se. I mean, you can look at the company we just saw that is all about sort of sharing your closet, right?
Yep.
And say, is that really an internet company? Or is that a human being company with a set of values that's really interesting, right? And there's a bunch of these companies. There's so many of them. And last year, a friend and I were taking a mountain bike ride, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're required to in California. And so we were taking a mountain bike ride, and he pitched me this idea. He said, all these amazing companies just happening everywhere. And you're like the guy who used to put them all up on stage, like you do, Louis. And I had stopped doing that. And he said, why don't we do an artist open studio for companies, right? And I kind of thought about that. And I said,
and you were like, well, I already did that, right?
Well, but first of all, I thought it was an insane idea, because as someone who started a lot of companies, the idea that I would just sort of say, hey, everybody take the day off while everyone wanders around our offices, right? It seemed insane. So I said, that's a dumb idea. But then it's one of those things that tugs at you, and I started thinking about how to produce it, and what it turned into was OpenCo. And it's like, you know, how many of you have gone to like multi-day music festivals, right? Super bitch, you know, you get one of these cool bracelets and you walk around and, you know, trip out and go to tents, and there's like 8 or 9 different stages, and you sort of pick your day, right? And you go, I'm going to go to this band on this stage, and then I'm going to go over to this stage and see this band. And the bands go off in these gigs at on the hour or every 15, 20 minutes, and you can stagger your day. So we took that idea of a music festival and an artist open studio and a business tech conference and mashed it together. So OpenCo is essentially you go around into the headquarters of the companies, and they have slots where they go off, where they do their gig. And it's the founder in his or her native environment talking about why they're doing what they're doing. And I found, you know, you and I, Loic, and I think many in this room have the privilege of actually going into a lot of different companies. And when you go in and you see what's in the on the walls, and are there dogs walking around, and what are the employees?
Airbnb has very cool offices.
Yeah,
for
exactly. The offices tell you so much. You get so much data from that. And if
or you get that it's a totally boring company.
Or you get that it's kind of a boring company. Exactly. And so I just found that creating a festival where people wander around a modern working city and go into these neighborhoods and into these buildings and into these companies, it's a different experience. And so we beta tested it in San Francisco late last year, and it really worked. And so we're rolling out around, I guess, the world. We're doing it here in London. We're doing it in Detroit.
So London, so that you know they know and they can join still, right? They can still join it.
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
So open.co.
Open. Unfortunate address that we had to get, but it's openco.us. It's just the only thing that was available. We're going to fix that soon. We're still early in the beta of this idea, but it's a super cool idea. And
they can join for tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
So tomorrow you go around London, and
there's 55 companies, and so far, like, I don't know, 1,500 people have registered, and it's free. It's free if you're a host company. It's free if you want to go.
So it's for sharing economy.
Yeah, it's a total sharing economy.
And you're not making it a business, you're bored.
We absolutely are going to make it into a business, and we're figuring that out at lunch after this.
At lunch.
But I think, you know, the B Corporation is one of the things we're considering doing, actually, what Chad was talking about yesterday. Because this really is about, and also what Larry was talking about, it's about creating a platform. London is a pilot. This is run by people in London, not by me. Right, and it's being driven by a team in London, a group of volunteers, and that's sort of, there's a TED-like TEDx feeling to it as well. And all the videos that are being taken of all the companies are completely free and open for anyone to do anything they want with. The entire thing is underwritten by huge, evil corporations that, you know, everyone hates because they're marketers. I actually really like large companies that have large marketing budgets. I don't have a problem with them. As a matter of fact,
that's because you sell them a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, well, we do. I mean, that's what Federated Media is. It's a very large media company that supports independent publishers. And if it weren't for American Express and GM and, you know, companies like that,
You came back to Federated Media.
I did. 3 months ago, I returned as CEO of Federated Media.
You could not live without it.
It's like a child, you know. I mean, when you think about some of these companies, like Jeremy at Yelp, 10 years. You know, Chad is past 5 years at Etsy. I did 5 years as CEO of Federated, and I thought I was sort of pulling a Michael Jordan.
LeWeb is 10 years.
Yeah, LeWeb is 10 years. Web 2 Summit was 8 years. And I did 5.5 years at Federated, and I left in 2010 as CEO. And I thought, you know, 5.5 years, that was more than I did at Wired Magazine. I did 4.5 there, you know. I thought, that's enough, you know, I'm gonna turn it over to someone else, and I'll be able to back out of the room slowly and pull this kind of Michael Jordan, you know, and was doing really well, and I was going out on top. And it's sort of like a teenager, you know, now, the company, and you don't necessarily want to leave it, you know, in the house with the keys. I felt like I needed to come back.
But yet advertising is completely out of fashion, right? You heard Larry say, no advertising at Burning Man. And we gather 60,000 people. There is no marketing. We don't even have someone taking care of marketing.
And, you know,
and so this is all last century.
It's wonderful. That's, to me, the exception that proves the rule.
Etsy. No, it's not an exception. Etsy, Chad says
well, as far as I can
marketing.
tell, like, no one's running around, you know, streaked with dirt and naked, you know, right here in London, at least not every day. So Burning Man is wonderful. I have friends who've gotten married there, and it is an extraordinary expression of communal spirit. The rest of the time, we all need to make a living and figure out how to run our businesses.
So you don't
and marketing is an extremely important part of that. And we have literally 17,000 publishers in the Federated network, of which hundreds make their living independently, through working with us and working with marketers. And I'm really, really proud of that. And I don't think there's anything wrong working with marketers. As a matter of fact, I think it's really important to get marketers to start to understand how to have a strong, high-integrity, personalized human voice as part of this conversation we're having.
And you created that somehow. You were one of the
well,
first.
in 2005, when we launched Federated Media, I wrote this sort of manifesto about how marketing is really comes straight from Doc Searles and others in the Clue Train manifesto. But it's, you know, you've got to learn how to have a conversation with your customers at scale, leveraging digital, if you're going to survive as a brand. And in order to do that, you need to start somewhere.
And you think they are doing that?
I think they're getting much, much, much better at it. As a matter of fact, there was on your second stage, there was a whole conversation about that just now. You know, I mean, where Oreo is figuring out how to have a conversation. You know, it has to be in context. But the era of just slamming your message, you know, to people because they're captive audiences is certainly over. So corporations have to figure out how to actually be what they are, because corporations are people, right? And so they have to figure out how to have a voice like human beings, and that's something that at Federated we spend a lot of time working on.
But still, John, I mean, you're saying that, but if you go to Google and you look at the advertisers there, it's you know, you click on links, and you go to Facebook and you have that column, and Zuckerberg is notorious for not being a big fan of advertising, right? At least at the beginning.
Oh, I think Mark Zuckerberg...
Is it not like
Mark Zuckerberg's a huge fan of advertising now.
Well, he needs to.
He's about a $3.9 billion fan of advertising, which is how much money he made from advertising last year.
Which is still 2/3 of his IPO.
Yeah, I think he likes ads. But if you look at the trends...
Well, he should have many more ads to beat back to the IPO price, right?
If you look at the trends of what's happening in advertising, there's sort of two big trends. One is the rise of programmatic ad tech, and the other is the rise of what's called native content marketing, native advertising content marketing. I believe the two are merging. They will come together, and you will start to see that voice, the native content-driven voice, being placed in the right time, at the right place, in the right context, in real time. And that's an extraordinary thing. And if you think about search, which I wrote a book about...
But take an example. So basically, if you want to, let's say you want to go on holidays in Cabo, because now I live in California, so I have my references.
So you want to go to holidays in Afghanistan, is that what you said?
That's where the ads show up, right? So the ads should come up exactly when I need it and when I need and when I'm looking for something, not
advertising is content, and it should be good content that you actually wish to consume. Exactly. And I think search was the first expression of that, one that became the most valuable company, you know, in the internet, Google, because the ads were in fact native to the expectation of the audience. The audience had an intent, they brought the intent to this service, the service delivered back results from that intent that included advertising that was useful and in context. That is native advertising. That was the first at-scale native advertising system, and it was programmatically delivered. What we need to do is get to the point where that's true for all marketing. And I think that's where we're headed, and that's why my company, Federated, merged with a company that does programmatic ad trading. We're one of the largest in the United States in that space.
You think we'll have ads in Google Glass?
I am 100% certain there will be ads in Google Glass.
Do you
100% certain of that. They're saying no, but it's just, that's silly, of course.
Do you believe it will be a success?
Not next year, but yes, ultimately, without question. We are, as a society, in the process of becoming data. I mean, if you just saw Mimoto, right? I mean, hello. You know, and that's, you can imagine what happens with about 2 cycles of Moore's Law on something like Mimoto. It just becomes, you know, it's a button that's in every piece of clothing you buy, and everything about you becomes data, right? How many of you wear some kind of a, you know, Fitbit or a Nike Fuel Band or, you know, Body Media or one of those things? You're becoming data, you know, and that data is going up into the cloud, and it's being crawled by intelligent spiders who are gaining insight from that across aggregate, you know, double-hashed anonymous data, and giving you insight back and saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't eat that cheeseburger right now, right? Because maybe your blood cholesterol is not really at the point where that cheeseburger would be additive to your life at this moment.
But do you think
having that in your ear sounds really super creepy, but it sounded super creepy to declare who your friends were 10 years ago publicly, right? And then we all just did it. Right?
But you think it's a good thing that we have a button which becomes
I think it's a good thing that
every 10 seconds taking a picture of everything. People will behave differently, right? I won't be the same.
People behave differently when this thing ended up in their home in the 1890s and it was called a telephone. Yes, I mean we change our behaviors based on the technologies we embrace and endorse. This is coming, this is happening, it's not going to not happen. What we have to do is think about what kind of a culture and society do we want to be when everything that's physical can be represented digitally and therefore made liquid. And we are in the process of making everything physical and every relationship we have liquid, right? So those closets, the women, what they're doing is they're making women's closets a liquid asset, right? You know, car sharing devices are making cars liquid and shareable. We do not have a liquid government or a liquid regulatory framework, right? Or a liquid municipal, regulatory framework. And those two are clashing, and it's super interesting to watch that and to note that. But there are some things that I'm a bit concerned about, which is that we have all of this data. We are each of us making about 565 gigs of data a year. Some of us far more than that, some of us far less, but on average, which is something like 7,500 2010 versions of the web, 7,500 of those a year we're making. It's a lot, 3.6 zettabytes of data. And what I worry about is, are we as a society making canonical that it is we are the platform for that data, or is the platform for that data Google, Facebook, Twitter, where does that data live and how do we instrument it? I would argue that we need to become the platform for our data. Each of us individually needs to take responsibility, ownership, and authority over that. And that conversation has just begun.
If you think about GoPro, I mean, I don't know if you took, like I took some GoPros for a ride, and you end up with like tons of, like gigabytes of footage on your iMovie, and I always end up doing nothing with it.
Doing nothing with the GoPro.
It takes a day to edit this thing, right?
Yeah, it takes
or you will have to pay someone to do it, and I don't want to do that with stupid
I remember when I was reporting my first book, I sat down with Eric Schmidt, who was at that point the CEO, the new CEO of Google, and I said, so what's next? What are you guys going to do? You figured out search. What's next? And he said, that box of old photos under your, in your closet? And I said, sure, everyone's got boxes of old photos. He's like, that's next. I'm like, that sounds like deeply boring. But what he was really saying was that at some point Google is going to be the platform where you can start to take all of this sort of digital exhaust and turn it into some value, right? But I think there's going to be an extremely large amount of waste before that really becomes true, right?
And it's happening. Yeah.
We are making far more data than our capacity to absorb, understand, share, and derive value from it. That's why there's so many entrepreneurs in the room, because such a huge opportunity to do.
It's just beginning.
It's making, as I said, it's making everything liquid. So someone will come along and try to solve for that problem if they haven't already and we just haven't heard about it.
So that's your book, right? You're working on?
That's the book. So the
you have
book,
a title already?
And I have a co-author who's here, Sarah Watson, who's a wonderful partner in doing the book. It's called If Then. It's an archaeology of the future. So what the framework is to find the artifacts today that are extant in the world that if 1 billion people use them one generation from now, then what would our society be like? So if you look 30 years back and ask the same question, that's when I'm dating myself, but that's when I started my career as a journalist. I was obsessed with personal computers, which came out 30 years ago. I was obsessed with networks, which came out, commercially, the first few 100,000 people using CompuServe and Prodigy and those 30 years ago. And I was super obsessed with mobile phones, which were like these humongous bricks. And the first one came out in 1982, the Motorola came out with a commercial mobile phone. And those were the artifacts then that were the artifacts of the future in 1982, 1983. What we're doing is looking for those now and telling their stories of what happens when 1 billion people are using something like a Fitbit, right?
A billion people?
A billion.
Oh, when it's happening.
Yeah, and by the way, that's going to probably not take very long. Not only because those of you who use them know it really does change your behavior. On the average person who uses them loses something like 7.5 pounds a year.
Really?
Yes. But it's also that companies are going to start requiring that you use a Fitbit or asking or strongly suggesting or creating an economic incentive because their insurance premiums will go down significantly at Procter & Gamble or at these large companies because people are using Fitbits.
Well, it's like there is a company already in San Francisco that you plug a little something in the port of your car. You know, all the cars have the same port.
Yeah.
Data port.
Yeah.
And you plug it in, it will start recording everything from the car and everything the way you drive. And it's the same if they figure out that your
insurance premiums go down.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's progressive
so if I disclose the way I drive, I'm going to get...
it's a little scary to think of all that data streaming out of your car as you're driving around, and especially, you know, I have a teenage son who drives. I would love to plug one of those in, but I think he'd think I was like the worst dad in the world if I did it.
But just don't tell him.
Well, that's kind of evil too, right?
But so the world you're describing, John, is fascinating. We'll have a sensor on our body that will track if we drink too many beers or wine. And then a sensor on our car that will track how we drive.
We already do.
And then what? You know, it's...
Well, then we have a discussion as a society about what kind of a culture we want to live in, right? Then we really have to ask ourselves the hard questions about, you know, do we or do we not believe in some of the ideals that, you know, that the democracies are built on. It's a true test of our society, and it's a super interesting time to be alive because we will be asking ourselves these questions. As John Perry Barlow said earlier, you know, almost all that which can be known will be knowable. And so we can start to ask some really existential questions, right? And when that's the case, you know, things get super interesting. And I think we're just entering that era. So this book is about that, really.
And you think the scary parts are not that important?
Look, I was one of the co-founders of Wired magazine, so I'm like genetically wired to be an optimist, right? I mean, Wired is a very happy magazine. We believe, you know? And so, yeah, I think we're going to do it. I think we're going to figure it out, you know? But I think we'll mess up along the way, which is sort of human. And if anyone who's in a startup knows, usually you get your business model wrong 4 or 5 times before you figure out the right one, and then you change it again, right? And so I think that's the same way with society. It's just that we haven't really been making that many shifts in our social, you know, structure. We have got to start iterating more quickly in our social structure. I think it's great that you had Burning Man here, and I think that's what OpenCo is about. It's about celebrating that new approach to economic activity that's much more open, shared, collaborative, and that's you know,
I should have invited you in that conversation to see what you would have to say to Larry about having no advertising, and he's pretty opposed to it.
Well, you know, I think it would probably be really weird to have Budweiser sponsoring Burning Man, but on the other hand, if Budweiser had a gift to give, and it was like free kegs at Burning Man, my guess is people would be stoked about that.
I agree.
You know, as long as it was a human being and not a brand, right? And it was a person who was like Mr. Bud.
And there is, because
probably there is a Mr. Bud at Burning Man.
There is a champagne camp, and there is, but it's just not branded.
Right, that's understood. I mean, it's good. I just think that there's a place for the companies that we build that become successful, that wish to reach out to their constituents and have a conversation. That's what marketing is. And so it shouldn't be wrong or bad. It should just be done well.
How can we follow your book being written? Are you going to tweet about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just follow my handle, which is my full name, and you'll hear all about it.
Or just Google John. And we'll see you at
OpenCo tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
yes.
And that's very exciting. You're going to do that all around the world.
Yeah,
I think it's a super cool idea. I'm very jealous. I wish I would have had that idea. It's a really good one. I'll keep following.
It's an inside-out conference. Instead of being in a ballroom, you're out in the city.
It's a great idea.
And so hopefully it'll be a success here, and we'll bring it around the world.
Excellent. Well, we'll see you tomorrow at OpenCo.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. All right. Time for lunch for those of you here at LeWeb London, and otherwise, if you're following live, 2:30 British time. See you in a bit for the closing of the startup competition and some more talks.